Wait, didn't I already look at this? Oh yeah, that was Anbernic. Greetings, Retro Zoltan here. I'm delighted to show you today the Miyoo A30, a pocketable handheld from, well, Miyoo. It's hard to keep track of all the companies making handheld gaming devices these days, but Miyoo certainly found a name for themselves in the past few years, and of course a fan favorite is the Miyoo Mini. I would like to think the A30 is for those that really wanted a horizontal style handheld, with all the fun and style that the Miyoo Mini had. So let's take a look at this thing, how it compares to the Anbernic RG28xx, and if it's still relevant today to be even looking at it. First things first, I didn't buy this. This was an actual donation from a watcher of the channel who reached out to me wanting to remain anonymous. To be honest, getting a system donated like this really helps out the channel so much. So thank you, Anonymous. This device was actually having troubles when I first got it, but more on that later. The A30 comes in 4 colors. A black and white one like the one I have here, a red and gold one that mimics the look of a Famicom controller, a sort of black and gray, and a sort of white and gray. Right now, the A30 goes between $30 and $50 US, which is more than fair in my opinion. I noticed that they went down to $30 for Black Friday sales, and it hasn't ventured too far from there since then. It's clearly a good time to pounce on these. Look for links to this below. The Miyoo A30 simply comes with the console itself, directions, a USB cable, and a Type-C audio converter. More about that shortly. In most cases, you're going to get a case thrown in as well. I'm a big fan of editions like this. The device itself is very small and light, and I can tell this was clearly made for traveling with you always. I know I'm making it look tiny holding it in my large hands, but trust me, it's small in a good way. It's honestly the same size as a NES controller. I can't seem to find my original, but here it is compared to the 8-bit DOE controller equivalent. Just holding it feels good. The plastic feels solid, and the metal faceplate just makes it look like a thing of quality. My memories of the Miyoo's earlier products like the Pocket Go come into play here when you look at them next to each other. They clearly are going with the same design, and since I love my Pocket Go so much, you won't hear any flack from me. Taking a look at the D-pad, I'm not too concerned, but it does feel a bit loose. I watched a few reviews on this before I had one who said the same thing. Thought they might have been exaggerating, but yeah, it feels a bit too giving. The buttons, in my opinion, feel good and are a good size. Much better than other systems that have the same form factor, including the Anbernic RG28xx. All models have the same color buttons, which to me just invites button modification. If you're into this sort of thing, I'm positive there are people out there selling button replacements. If you sell them or know anyone doing so, let me know and I'll post them in the description. Start and select buttons sort of hide on this model, but they're also hard plastic and in a good spot out of the way. A nice addition, of course, is the analog stick. It feels like a much smaller Nintendo Switch analog stick sunk deep in to not get in the way if you're tossing it in your pocket. It also acts like another button, so honestly I have nothing bad to say about it. It's exactly what I want. The top of the unit has trigger and shoulder buttons next to each other. Not my favorite, but impossible to make it clearly pocketable otherwise. They click okay as long as your fingers are in the right place. Pushing from just any angle won't work, so you may get frustrated if you don't have a fantastic grip on this thing. It also has a home button, a convenient way to back out of games, a volume rocker switch, and of course USB charging. This is where the C-type converter comes into play because this doesn't have an analog port for headphones. I'm not a giant fan of these. And even worse is it comes out the top, which is even worse. It just looks awkward. And in a way no longer convenient pulling it out of your pocket. You're not going to see promotional pictures of this with the converter on, that's for sure. Anonymous didn't send this converter to me, so I bought one off of Amazon to find out it didn't work. Nothing I tried, in fact, appeared to work, so I guess the wiring for this special cable is proprietary. So definitely don't lose it. The bottom has a slot for an SD card, which concerns me right away when I only see one slot. I admit I've been spoiled with 2. One for the operating system and one for the games. But as I dug into this further, it's even worse than I feared. Kind of. I'll go into this shortly. The screen is a small 2.8-inch IPS and looks okay. Earlier hardware of this device had a dimmer screen, which I believe they addressed because it was looking pretty bright to me. There's nothing else to speak of other than the speaker on the front, which is fine for the most part. It sounds choppy on certain games, but that's the CPU's fault for sure.
It's so good to see you. Here's how to play.
Cranking it up all the way doesn't make it worse, so I guess no issues are here either. There's also a power switch on the side, which is pretty self-explanatory. Quick stats of the Miyoo A30 are the following. The screen is a 2.8-inch IPS full 640 by 480. The CPU is an A33 quad-core ARM Cortex A7 at a 1.3 GHz. The GPU is a dual-core Mali 400. It has Wi-Fi and a 2600 milliamp hour battery that lasts about 4 hours. The Miyoo A30 has a bit of a feature that seems to goof up people, where you have to hold down the power button for a long time so it knows you mean it, about 4 seconds. I'm assuming since this is a traveling device, it's meant to prevent accidental pushes. Once you're past that, it boots up quick, with the stock image at least. And of course, background music that sounds fitting enough for a Sims game. At least it's not completely annoying. And thank goodness a way to turn it off. Done. Out of the box, you should experience a menu similar to what you're seeing here. I'm currently running at version 228, which I believe is the original stock firmware that Miyoo will settle you with. I'm being a bit vague because, well, getting the original firmware for me was a bit of a challenge. My first biggest complaint is, if you somehow wreck your SD card like I did, you may be dead in the water. Why? If you go to the Miyoo website and attempt to download it, the firmware is, well, let's just say it takes forever and a day. Once I was able to get the original stock firmware, it got even stranger from there, since the Miyoo A30 can load up without an SD inserted anyway. How can I change the firmware using the SD card if it doesn't even need it? After some reading, but mostly playing around, the USB cable comes into play here. If you boot it up with the appropriate files on the SD card, while the USB cable is plugged in to a power device, it will change its firmware. It's weird, I'm not a huge fan of it, but it worked after experimenting for 4 days? Yeah, I'm a bit slow. Speaking strictly stock firmware here, the Miyoo A30 will attempt to play the following systems: Famicom NES games, Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, MAME Arcade, Sega Genesis, Nintendo 64, Neo Geo Pocket, PC Engine, PSP, PlayStation, Super Nintendo, Sega Master System, and WonderSwan. And if that's not enough emulation for you, there's also the RetroArch menu that'll allow you to play even more of your favorites. Generally speaking, you're going to get mixed results depending on the system. Not surprising to me, Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, and PSP ran bad at certain times in the game. Playable in certain situations, but not the best gaming experience. PlayStation 1 seemed okay to me, better than I expected honestly, and having the analog stick working is a blessing when playing those games for sure. Speaking of the analog stick, in certain situations, the analog stick wasn't working. For those emulators, you'll have to map in the analog stick, and if you're not great at this sort of thing, you'll probably just avoid it completely. The D-pad still feels loose, but you get used to it after a while. I didn't have too much trouble with it, but I'm curious if over time things may get worse for rotating and pivoting. There are those that are modding the D-pad using tape to prevent accidental diagonals, but that hasn't happened to me. Not yet anyway. The stock firmware of the Miyoo A30 is far from perfect, if immediately misspelling arcade is any indicator.
That's not a good start, but keep going.
I have heard users report frustrating problems, such as not being able to disable frame skipping, making certain games nearly unplayable, or random game crashes and sound glitches. While my experience wasn't as dire, the menu organization still feels clunky, and I agree with those looking for alternatives. So what is there? Thankfully, the community has stepped in to offer better alternatives. One standout solution is MinUI, developed by Sean Inman, which overhauls the A30's interface into a streamlined, no-frills experience. MinUI is as simple as it gets. No themes, no box art, or extra settings to tweak. Just a clean, fast way to jump into your games after a quick SD card setup. On the other hand, there's Spruce, another popular custom firmware option that refines the original menu system into something far more functional and tolerable. Spruce offers more advanced features, such as hotkeys, cheat support, and even taking advantage of your wireless to grab box art, making it a good choice for those who want a little extra from their handheld. With Spruce, you're even going to add more systems, including Artaboy, Intellivision, and the ZX Spectrum. Why not? With Spruce, you can climb up to around 65 distinct systems to keep you busy. There are even more custom firmware options, which, to be fair, is evidence that the original stock firmware wasn't the best choice for me. I'll list links to all that I'm aware of in the description below. It's hard to look at this without comparing to the Anbernic RG28xx, a system I reviewed earlier this year that I admit I like more. The RG28xx is certainly more money, but it's a bit more powerful, and a better playing experience out of the box for sure. The RG28xx doesn't have wireless, but it does have TV out, and the A30 doesn't have a headphone jack, but the RG28xx does. And from the bottom, thank you very much. It all depends on what's important to you to find out which one outweighs the other. So in conclusion, what do I think of the Miyoo A30? I really like the hardware. The look and the feel of the A30 is great, and it's definitely portable, no question. The price is really hard to beat also. I mean, $30 is definitely a low-budget handheld device. For $30, you're going to get a decent device that with some alterations can make it even better. It all depends on how involved you want to be. Again, if you're a tinkerer, if you like to fiddle around with these sort of things, I recommend it. But if you just want something that works and works well immediately, I recommend looking elsewhere, and most certainly consider Anbernic's options. Given how difficult it is to get the stock image, I recommend backing up your SD card immediately. It's a must. Since Miyoo made it so annoying, it's almost a punishment if you don't. And that's all I have to say about the Miyoo A30. It's super cheap and super portable, so it might be worth giving it a go, even if you're not sure. You won't beat this price, not by a long shot. Special thanks to the Retro Zoltan community for sending me the A30. And if you feel you have something you may want to donate, please reach out to me here or on the Retro Zoltan Discord. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me in other ways, I also have a Patreon, which will in time have videos, downloads, and tutorials that only members will have access to. But even watching or liking this video helps me, so thank you for sticking to the end. Thank you so much for watching, thank you for your support, and as always, I'll see you next time. Bye.